Hello, good day, and welcome to eri-tv News. I am Victoria, broadcasting from Canada, and these are the headlines for today's stories. Journalists condemn media crackdown in Ethiopia. Human rights and security deteriorate in northern Ethiopia as Tigray conflict spreads. Which assets $2.5 million to deliver life-saving assistance to cover 1.6 million people affected by the northern Ethiopia conflict. Bringing you this and more in detail after the short break. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back from that short break now news in detail. Journalists condemn media crackdown in Ethiopia. A group of 16 media professionals have signed a petition condemning Ethiopian government to mistreating media practitioners, which they attribute to the striking press freedom. In a statement seen by the East African on Monday, the group said striking media space had forced some journalists to quit while others fled to exile. We stand today in solidarity with our colleagues across the country. For decades, Ethiopia had carved a reputation for itself as one of the world's top jailers of journalists due to institutional and system crackdown on critical voices and intolerance to dissent. Ethiopian infamous anti-terror proclamation passed into law in 2009 paved the way for journalists to be charged with treason, terrorism, and be sentenced to life in prison. This led to scores of Ethiopian journalists being arrested or forced into exile and served as a pretext to shut down broadcast and point outlets which didn't cater to pro-government narrative, said the group in a statement. The group noted that in 2018, there was collective optimism when incarcerated journalists were freed, with those in exile invited back home. Foreign media outlets also set up shop in Ethiopia for the first time. However, the country has since backpedaled considerable on its pledge to harness press freedoms. Detentions of journalists have once again become the norm. News outlets have been forced to shut down, and the local independent press has been all about scuppered. Over the course of 2021, two journalists, Derek Kibidi and Caesar Faida, were killed, and over 40 journalists and media staffers were detained, resulting in Ethiopia rejoining the ranks of African top jailers of journalists, the group added. The group said the journalists were disappointed and saddened by the setbacks and the reversals of advances made just a few years ago, which had uplifted Ethiopian media professionals and had many of them inspiring to contribute in their own capacity to widening of our country's independent press sphere. With the distressing news that three media workers, Admiral Arman Kiaru, Temagar Nagara, and Thomas Ajinda, are said to be put on trial in Medan, and with the death of voices in Ethiopian society speaking in defense of the country's journalists. The journalists welcomed the release of their colleagues from custody in recent weeks and reiterated calls for the immediate release of all remaining imprisoned journalists and media staffs detained across Ethiopia. In November last year, the Ethiopian government issued an order banning media from covering military operations as war continued to ravage the popular and largest nation in the Horn of Africa. Abiy Ahmed admiration asked media practitioners to desist from reporting military operation in his country. The general ban came a week after the Ethiopian Media Authority issued warning to some international media houses regarding their coverage on the ongoing conflict. The warning was issued to BBC World News, CNN, Reuters, and the Associated Press, with the government threatening it will revoke their licenses for reporting fake news, among others. Moving on to the next story, human rights and security deteriorate in northern Ethiopia as Tigray conflict spreads. The comment came as UN Human Rights Office released a new report on the Tigray conflict covering the period from November 22nd of last year to February 28. Basha said her office has documented hundreds of killings and injuries of civilians due to multiple airstrikes by the Ethiopian Air Force. At the same time, she said, the Tigray forces and other armed groups have carried out devastating attacks in Alpha and Ahara, resulting in scores of death and hundreds of injuries. She accused the warring parties of gross violations of human rights, of looting, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure, including schools and health facilities. The attack that I have cited and many others raise serious concerns under international humanitarian law, which prohibits the deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian objects, as well as discrimination attacks that strike military objectives and civilians. Without distinction, he again urged the government, Taiwan force, and all other parties to conflict to see such violations. Ambassador Michael Helen Gadain is Ethiopian Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN. Ambassador Mahelet Helu Gadin, Ethiopia Deputy Government Representative to the UN in Geneva, she took umbrage at the report, saying it was based on rich narrative that had nothing to do with the reality on the ground. She said it was unfortunate that human rights were being cynically used to bluster what she termed terrorist groups to the determinate of the Ethiopian government. She added Ethiopia abided by its human rights obligations and was prepared to engage in a constructive dialogue to resolve the conflict. During the reporting period, which had recorded more than 15,000 arbitrary arrests and detention in connection with the state of emergency decreed by the government, most appear to be ordinary citizens of Tigray ethnicity and encouraged by the authorities' recent decision to lift the state of emergency. Ethiopia launched its military offensive Tigray on November 4, 2020 to out the TPLF from its northern stronghold. The UN says 40% of Tigray population of 6 million suffer from acute hunger, with 400,000 on the verge of famine. Moving on to the last story, Utah 6 US 2.5 million to deliver life-saving assistance to over 1.6 million people affected by northern Ethiopia conflict. Utah 6 $205 US to deliver life-saving assistance to over 1.6 million people affected by the northern Ethiopia conflict. The UN Refugee Agency is appealing for $205 million to deliver life-saving assistance and protective to over 1.6 million people displaced due to the conflict in the northern Ethiopia. 16 months of conflict in the northern Ethiopia has created a humanitarian crisis. Civilians, including refugees and internally displaced people, have been displaced amid widespread shelter and access to service and critical levels of food insecurity. More than 2 million Ethiopians have fled in search of safety within the country, and almost 60,000 across the border into Sudan. Several camps and settlements hosting Eritrean refugees have been attacked or destroyed. Further displacing tens of thousands within Ethiopia, funds raised will help us to provide essential protection and humanitarian assistance to those impacted by the violence. At least 60,000 IDP households will be assisted with shelter and emergency relief terms, which will establish additional protection that's adding to the more than 60 already set up to identify people with specific needs and to refer survivors of gender-based violence to services. And we will support the integration of 75,000 IDP families who wish to return to their homes. They welcome the quick response of Ethiopian government to identify new sites to settle and displace refugees, which requires resources, which will work with the government, refugees, and returning services and partners to complete the allowance site in the Amhara region, so that Eritrean refugees can be relocated as soon as it is possible to do so, and to ensure essential services. A new temporary site for Eritrean refugees cut up the fighting in Afar region is similarly in need of urgent investment. Together with RRS and partners, we're aiming to get 20,000 refugee children back into school. While Utah continues to reinforce its protection and humanitarian assistance, it reiterates all call to all parties of the conflict to protect civilians in line with their obligation under international humanitarian law and to provide safe and unhindered access to all in need. This is where I end the news on Alena Media TV. I am Victoria and thanks for watching.